The movie begins with an author showcasing his new book at a reading exhibition. He begins to narrate the story of a young couple leaving their hotel as a man watches them. The man returns to his apartment. He is an old, lonely man with no family. Meanwhile, the young couples, Dora and Rory, are seen celebrating over Rory's successful new book release. Rory is given the award as the best author of the decade due to his book, The Window Tears. He is humbled and surprised at the book's success, as he didn't think it would have much impact. The narrator begins to describe Rory's life before becoming a successful writer. He and his girlfriend, Dora, have moved into an apartment. Rory is an upcoming writer and dreams of writing novels that will have great impact in the world. He dedicates all of his time to writing, but no one seems to want to publish his work. Unable to keep with rent and daily costs of living, he resorts to taking handouts from his parents. His father advises him to get a regular job and set writing aside. He consoles Rory and tells him he understands that he is passionate about being a writer, but cautions him that part of being responsible is knowing one's own limitations. Rory heeds to his father's advice and gets a desk job at a publishing company. Rory and Dora get married. They go to France for their honeymoon. As they rummage through the streets of Paris, they enter an antique shop. Dora notices an old briefcase and buys it for Rory. Their honeymoon ends and they return to New York. Rory manages to hold a meeting with the head publisher of the company in the hopes of getting his book published. The man tells Rory his book is too intellectual for the general public and would not be able to sell, especially since he is an upcoming writer with no fan base. One day, Rory notices a script hidden away in the bag Dora got for him during their time in Paris. He reads it and is immediately captivated. Later in the day, he goes to dinner with his wife and friends. Rory continues to think about the story. He wonders who could have wrote it. He is envious and fears he will never be able to write a story that good. Rory suddenly storms out of the restaurant. Dora follows after him. He tells her that he hates his life, that he isn't the man he thought he would be, and nothing is good in his life. Dora is hurt by his comment as she thought their marriage was enough to make him happy. They get back home. Rory's mind is still on the book. He looks at the script and sighs in frustration, for he so desperately wishes he could produce such a beautiful story. He then begins to type out the script word for word on his laptop. He allows himself to pretend as though the words have come from him and types out the entire script. The next day, he finds Dora waiting for him. He is concerned to find her crying. She tells him she accidentally came across his script when she was using his laptop. Before Rory can confess that he didn't write it, she tells him it's his best work and is happy to finally see him write a story so earnest. She pleads him to have it published. Rory sees how proud she is of him and decides not to tell her the truth. The next morning, Rory takes the script to the head publisher. Weeks pass and Rory forgets about the story. One day, the publisher calls Rory in and tells him he read the book. He tells Rory it is an extraordinary story, and the company would like to partner with him and publish the book. Rory is taken aback. He knows the story is not his, but it can provide him the opportunity to fulfill his dream and become a renowned author. He decides to sign the deal and publishes the book as his own. The book is a success. Rory becomes the new breakout star author, and his book is sold nationwide. Clay, who is narrating the story, now introduces the mysterious old man. He asks the audience for a short recess before they progress to the next chapter reading. Clay is seen taking autographs when a beautiful young woman approaches him. He is immediately attracted to her, and the two strike up a conversation. She tells him how much she admires his work as she is an aspiring writer. She begins to make flirtatious advancements towards him and he joyfully welcomes them. The recess ends and Clay returns to the story read. He continues to narrate the story. He describes the old man who has now followed Rory to the park. The old man tells Rory he is a fan of the book and holds great importance to him, since it mirrors his life in Paris. The man begins to quote the book word for word. Rory, who at first thought he was talking to just another overenthused fanatic, starts to feel uncomfortable as he suspects the old man may be the true author of the book. He gets up and attempts to leave, but the old man stops him. He accuses Rory of stealing his story. He then tells Rory the book he stole was actually inspired by his own life. Rory sits back down as the old man narrates his life and how he ended up writing the book. The scene transitions to the old man in his 20s. He has arrived in France right towards the end of the Second World War. He is fascinated by the country, as it is different from his country life back in America. He is grateful that he has been recruited in rehabilitation and doesn't have to experience any war. He befriends a man who introduces him to some books and he instantly falls in love with reading. For the first time ever, the young man has a dream and begins to write stories. One afternoon, he meets a French woman at a cafe and is immediately attracted to her. The two spend the summer together and fall in love. The war ends and he is returned to America. He is unsatisfied with his sedentary life back home and starts planning to return to France where he can be with Celia and become a writer. Celia is delighted by his return. They then marry. Their time together is blissful. The young man continues to explore writing. Celia becomes pregnant and they give birth to a baby girl. This time, however, is short-lived when their daughter falls ill. The doctors tell them that they can't do anything to help her. Both parents are in shock and mourn the death of their child. Celia shuts down and becomes emotionless while John pretends they're fine and focuses on moving on with their lives. This begins to eat away at their relationship. One night, the young man returns and finds that Celia is gone. She left a letter for him explaining that she had returned to her parents' house as she needed time to be alone. John realizes he has not only lost his daughter, but wife as well. This pushes him over the edge and he finally allows himself to grieve the loss of his child. Now fully in despair, the words he was struggling to express start to pour out of him. He begins to write about his time in France, how he met Celia, got married and had a child, and how their child died. He had never felt more motivated to write. Within a couple of weeks, the story was done. He then set out to reunite with Celia. She begs him to return to Paris without her as she is still grieving. Accepting that she needs more time, John leaves but asks her to read his story. Celia reads his book. She connects with every word he wrote. This allows her to overcome her grief. A few weeks later, she returns to Paris to be with John. On the day of her return, she forgets John's briefcase containing the book on the train. John lashes out at her for being careless and losing his most prized possession. This begins to eat away at their relationships as old wounds starts to resurface. Over time, John starts to long for his simpler life back in America. His longing becomes so strong until one day he leaves Celia and returns to America. Once in America, he tried writing again but something inside him was lost. He was so heartbroken that he no longer had the courage to write. Years passed and now the young man was now old. He continues to narrate his life to Rory and how one day, as he was taking a stroll, he came across Rory's book. To his surprise, the book was the exact copy of his long-lost story. The old man then gets up to leave. He tells Rory he doesn't care why he stole his work but simply wanted him to know the real story behind the book. He cheekily adds that if Rory were smart, he can steal this story as well and write another book. The old man leaves. Rory sits still in shock as he replays the conversation he just had with the old man. The scene transitions to Clay, who concludes the story and describes Rory returning to his life and forgetting his encounter with the old man. The audience breaks into applause. Clay meets up with the woman he met earlier. They begin to flirt and he invites her back to his apartment. She mocks his unfurnished apartment, and he subtly adds that he just moved in after his divorce from his wife. Rory heads downstairs and returns with some wine. The young woman questions him on the ending of his book. She tells him she believes there must be more to the character Rory. She pleads with him to give a proper ending to his story. Clay gives in and starts to narrate the story from where he left the character, Rory, sitting in the park. Consumed with guilt, Rory starts to drink and returns to his apartment. He finds Dora and tells her he lied to her and plagiarized his book. Dora is devastated. She feels hurt and betrayed because he committed a crime and deceived her without considering how this would affect their marriage. The next day, Rory comes clean to his publisher. The man convinces Rory not to disclose this secret any further as this would greatly damage the company's reputation. Rory desires to free himself from the guilt and decides to make amends with the old man. He tracks the man down and finds him working at a greenery. He pleads for forgiveness and promises to offer him rights to the book. The old man is offended by his offer and tells him he doesn't want his money. Rory tells him that he is sorry and asks how he can make things right, as he can no longer bear the guilt of what he has done. The old man tells him he has no choice but to live with the consequences of his action. He tells Rory that he didn't just simply steal his story, but the emotions that brought about the story. He then advises Rory to forget him and continue living his life. Rory heeds to the old man's words and leaves. A few weeks pass by and Rory discovers that the old man has passed away. He decides to keep the identity of the old man a secret and remains as the author of the book. The scene transitions back to Clay as he concludes Rory's story. The woman expresses her displeasure for the ending. Clay tells her that he didn't want to give the characters a happy ending as it better reflects the realities of life. She disagrees with him and points out that though life may not be fair, actions do have consequences. Therefore, Rory's character must meet some kind of repercussion. Clay becomes defensive and asks her how she would write Rory's ending. She tells him if Rory was a real character, he wouldn't be able to live with the guilt. She begins to describe how the truth of the old man would slowly start to ruin Rory's life. Clay becomes nervous when the woman continues to describe Rory and his wife's relationship and how their marriage would fall apart because of what he did. Clay collects his composure and applauds her version of the story's ending. He cheekily adds that she shouldn't get too worked up over a fictional character. They start to kiss. Suddenly, Clay pulls away as though questioning himself whether or not to sleep with her. She tries to pull him back to her and tells him she wants to be with him. She notices his hesitation and wonders why he brought her to his hotel room if he didn't want to be with her. He apologizes and tells her to leave. She continues to persist and asks him if that's what he really wants. This triggers Clay as he realizes what he's been truly longing for. He closes his eyes longingly as he envisions Rory walking up to Dora, who hugs her and whispers that he is sorry. The movie then ends revealing Rory from the story was actually Clay.